William catches Camilla burning Diana's belongings. Royal staff horrified. The story of Camilla and Diana has long been a scar in the history of the British monarchy. One was the Princess of Wales, adored by millions around the world. The other, the woman who was branded as the silent shadow haunting Diana's marriage. For decades, their names have been inseparably linked, woven into a tale of love, betrayal, and the relentless struggle for a place in royal history. Even after Diana's tragic death, the shadow of that rivalry has never truly faded. Instead, it has continued to ignite speculation, suspicion, and bitter whispers behind the palace walls. And now, just as the House of Windsor is striving to project an image of unity, a shocking revelation has shattered the fragile facade. Prince William, Diana's beloved son, is said to have caught Queen Camilla in a startling act, burning the personal belongings of the late Princess of Wales. A gesture that, to many, is not simply about disposing of old things, but rather an attempt to erase Diana's lingering presence within the monarchy. This discovery has sent shockwaves through the royal circle and reignited fierce debates among the public. Was Camilla trying to cleanse the palace of the ghost of her past rival? Or is this yet another painful reminder that Diana, even in death, remains an unshakable force, one that both haunts and defines the Windsor family? The corridors of Clarence House have always carried a hush, the kind of silence that holds deep secrets. One hallway, in particular, had been sealed off for years, a narrow passage past the Queen Mother's old drawing room. Most staff assumed it led to storage, perhaps housing old furniture or holiday decorations. But on that rainy Thursday evening, it became the center of a royal storm no one saw coming. Oliver, a young assistant footman, was delivering a tray of Earl Grey to Camilla's private quarters when he noticed an odd smell, faint but unmistakable smoke, not the comforting scent of a lit fireplace, but something sharper, laced with perfume and parchment. Curiosity got the better of him. He followed the smell down the passage and saw a door, always locked, now slightly ajar. From the crack, light flickered like candlelight, but the scent now carried weight, not just smoke, but burning fabric. Oliver backed away, unsure what to do. Moments later, Prince William entered the house unexpectedly, returning from an unannounced visit to a nearby charity event. He was supposed to head back to Kensington Palace, but something drew him home. Oliver approached him, hesitant and pale, whispering about the smell, the open door, the flickering light. William frowned but didn't hesitate. He walked briskly toward the hallway. That door led to a storage room once filled with Diana's private items, sealed since the early years after her passing. Only a few people had keys. As William approached, the scent grew thicker, the air warmer. The door creaked open as he pushed. What he saw stopped him cold. Inside, surrounded by half-burned belongings, stood Camilla, dressed in a cashmere shawl, hair pinned back, holding tongs over a vintage fire bin. In it were burning silk, photos curling at the edges, a leather-bound book barely holding its shape. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked caught. The silence between them was louder than the crackling flames. William didn't speak yet. His eyes scanned the room. In one corner, a torn photo of Diana and Harry lay next to scorched paper. A sapphire earring glittered on the floor. This was not carelessness. It was intentional. That was the moment everything changed. William turned back toward the hallway, his voice low but firm. "Get the staff," he said. "Now." The real story was just beginning. Flames and fabric. The night William walked in, the moment Prince William stepped fully into the dimly lit room. Time seemed to halt. The only sound was the slow crackle of fire as embers danced in the old iron bin. Camilla stood still, her hand hovering over the flames, holding what looked like a folded blouse, light pink silk, unmistakably in Diana's style from the 1980s. William's eyes did not blink. He looked at the flames, at her hand, at the object about to disappear forever into smoke. For a brief second, she was not his stepmother, but a stranger who had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Camilla opened her mouth, perhaps to explain or defend, but the look on William's face stopped her. His voice, when it came, was calm, too calm. "What are you doing?" he asked, each word slow and quiet, like the steady tightening of a rope. Camilla straightened her back, placed the blouse into the bin, and watched it curl and blacken before answering. "Some things are better left in the past. Everyone should understand that." The sentence hit him like a slap. The past? It wasn't the past for him. These were pieces of his mother, all he had left of her touch, her scent, her handwriting. And here was Camilla deliberately turning them to ash in a room no one was supposed to enter, a room sealed by agreement out of respect. William stepped forward, his shoes brushing against the scorched corner of an old photograph on the floor, a picture of Diana at Balmoral, laughing, hair blowing across her face, holding young Harry close. He recognized it immediately. It had once been framed beside her bed. He bent to pick it up, the edges brittle from the heat. His hand trembled slightly as he held it. "I gave no permission for this," he said firmly. "No one did." Camilla looked at him then, truly looked at him, and something passed through her eyes, defiance mixed with resentment. She had lived in Diana's shadow for decades, and perhaps tonight she had tried to burn it away. But she underestimated the bond between Diana and her sons. Behind William, footsteps echoed as royal aides and security arrived. One by one they paused in the doorway, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror. The air was thick with smoke, history, betrayal, and something unspoken. Elizabeth, a longtime staff member who had served both Diana and Camilla, let out a soft gasp when she saw the bin. Her eyes welled up. She understood the weight of what was burning. William turned to the staff. "Put out the fire," he said. Then to Camilla, his tone like steel covered in velvet. "You will explain this. Not to me, to him." He meant Charles, but deep down he knew the explanation might never satisfy. Some scars come from flames that burn things you can never replace. Ashes of memory. What was burned? When the fire was finally extinguished, what remained in the iron bin was more than ashes. It was evidence. The room smelled of singed silk and scorched leather. William stood back as the staff moved carefully, collecting half-burned items with gloved hands. Every object pulled from the ashes told its own quiet story, not just clutter or forgotten scraps, but personal fragments of his mother's life, chosen with intention, now reduced to curling edges and smoke. Among the remains was the corner of a diary page, its ink blurred but a few words still legible. "I felt peace today." The staff member holding it froze, recognizing Diana's handwriting instantly. The journal had been one of the few private belongings she kept locked in her bedroom. William recognized it too. He had seen his mother write in it when he was a boy. Seeing it burned felt like losing her voice all over again. Next was a single ballet slipper, blackened at the toes, its ribbon melted into a twisted shape. Diana had worn those slippers during a private rehearsal for the surprise ballet performance she once did for Charles. William had watched that moment on tape over and over as a child. To see it now, blackened and tossed away, struck something raw in him. The most heartbreaking discovery was a letter addressed to Harry, its envelope charred but intact. With care, a staff member slid out the folded paper inside, only to find it partially burned, the bottom half gone. William read what remained. "My darling boy, no matter where life takes you, never forget that kindness is stronger than status." And then it ended, as if her voice had been cut off mid-thought. William clenched his jaw, forcing the grief back down. This was not carelessness. It was deliberate. Every item had been chosen for destruction. Not trinkets, not duplicates, but originals, things no one could replace or recreate. It felt like an erasure, not of objects, but of memory, legacy, and presence. Camilla had retreated from the room by then. The staff remained silent, a heavy quiet filling the space. They moved like mourners, recovering what little could be saved. William walked to a side table and opened a wooden box. Inside were a few more items untouched by fire, a brooch shaped like a crescent moon, a torn page from Diana's charity speech notes, a dried flower from her personal garden at Kensington. He took the box in his hands as though cradling something sacred. Turning to the staff, his voice was calm but filled with finality. "Lock this room. From this moment on, no one enters unless I say so." The staff nodded. They understood this wasn't just a fire, it was a betrayal of trust, of legacy, and of sacred memory. The consequences of that fire would burn far beyond the room where it began. A staff in shock, whispered reactions and silent tears. Word travels differently within palace walls, not with shouting or panic, but in glances, silence, untouched cups of tea, and corridors that grow quieter by the hour. That night, after William sealed the room, Clarence's house felt colder. The staff were trained professionals, accustomed to handling royal tempers and hidden scandals. But this was different. This wasn't gossip, it was grief. In the servants' hall, where no cameras could reach and rank momentarily disappeared, the atmosphere was still and heavy. Elizabeth, the senior dresser who had once zipped up Diana's gowns and brushed out her hair before galas, sat at the long oak table with her hands folded. She hadn't said a word since returning from the scene. Others joined her quietly, exchanging no more than eye contact. Finally, James, a valet who had only joined a few years ago, broke the silence. "Was it really her things?" he asked, not looking at anyone. Elizabeth nodded slowly. "It was hers. The perfume on that blouse. I'd know it anywhere. Penhaligon's bluebell. She wore it every summer." Her voice cracked, and she pressed a napkin to her eyes. In another corner of the estate, Thomas, a footman who had served under both Diana and Camilla, paced nervously. He had once brought Diana tea while she sat on the floor of her room, writing notes to her sons. He had seen the same warmth in her as the boys did. Now he couldn't shake the image of that warmth going up in smoke. "It wasn't just burning clothes," he whispered to another aide. "It was like watching someone tear pages out of a history book, like they wanted her erased." The younger staff were confused, some unsure of what exactly had been destroyed. But the older ones remembered Diana's presence vividly. She was not just a memory, she was the heartbeat of a softer monarchy. Her belongings carried meaning. Every handwritten note, every worn ballet slipper, even the ribbon tied around an old bouquet held emotion. Behind closed doors, there was debate. Some asked if Camilla had been given permission. Others whispered that perhaps she had acted out of pain, not cruelty. But none of it explained the secrecy. The locked door, the chosen items, the fire. Later that evening, the house steward gathered the staff privately and reminded them of their duty to discretion. But even he looked shaken. "You all know what this means," he said. "We saw too much tonight. Say nothing to the press. Say nothing outside these walls." Elizabeth spoke quietly from the back. "We were there for her when she lived. We will protect her in death." No one disagreed. That night, no one slept well. In a household trained to keep emotions buried beneath formality, something had shifted. The staff had always worked behind the scenes, but now they were silent witnesses to a deeper war, one not about titles or protocol, but about memory and the legacy of a woman the world still loved. William's confrontation. "This is my mother." By early morning, the fire was out, but the damage had only just begun. Clarence's house was unusually quiet. William had not left. He remained in the private study on the first floor, staring out the window with the small box of recovered items still in his hands. He had made one thing clear to his assistant. Camilla was not to leave the premises until he spoke with her directly. It wasn't long before she entered the room, shoulders squared, her expression unreadable. She closed the door behind her. William did not turn around. "I suppose you want an explanation," Camilla said, her voice steady but defensive. He set the box down on the table and finally faced her. There was no anger in his eyes, only disappointment and wounded disbelief. "I don't need an explanation," William said. "I need an answer." Camilla crossed her arms. "I didn't think it was worth keeping these things. They've been sitting in that room for decades. No one looks at them. No one touches them." William stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Because they were hers. Because they are all we have left." Camilla sighed, a flicker of irritation behind it. "You think I don't understand what she meant to you? To the country? I lived in her shadow for years. William, every time I walk into a room, she's still there. In the papers, in people's memories, even in your father's silence." William didn't flinch. "That shadow you speak of is not a ghost. It's her legacy. And tonight you tried to burn it." Camilla opened her mouth, but he cut her off, his voice firmer now. "This is not about the past. This is about respect. You touched something sacred without permission. That room was sealed for a reason." There was a pause. Camilla looked at him as if waiting for him to soften, to meet her halfway, but he didn't. Not this time. He walked to the desk and picked up the half-burned photo of Diana at Balmoral. He held it out toward her. "I watched her cry in that dress. I watched her comfort people you and I will never meet. That's not just fabric. That's my mother's story, her presence, her life." Camilla looked at the photo, then looked away. "I don't care what the world says," William continued. "Behind closed doors, I will protect what's mine, what was hers. If you ever try to take that from me again, there won't be another conversation like this." He did not wait for her response. He walked past her, opened the door, and left her standing alone. As he made his way down the hallway, Palisades stepped aside in silence. They didn't need to ask what had happened. His face said enough. The confrontation was over, but the consequences had only just begun. Charles's reaction: silence or sabotage? By the following afternoon, Buckingham Palace had shifted into quiet alert. The staff knew something had happened at Clarence's house, but no one spoke officially. Not yet. Prince William had returned to Kensington, his mood unreadable to most, but his silence spoke louder than any press statement ever could. The confrontation with Camilla had left a trail of emotional wreckage. But one question remained. Where was King Charles during all of this? Charles had spent the evening at Highgrove attending a closed-door charity meeting. His aides claimed he was unaware of what was unfolding at Clarence's house. But when he returned to London early the next day, William was already waiting. The meeting between father and son took place behind closed doors in the green drawing room. The conversation lasted less than 20 minutes, but marked a turning point in their already fragile relationship. And when William told him everything, laying out what he had seen with his own eyes, the fire, the burned letter, the destroyed photographs, Charles didn't respond immediately. He stared at the floor, fingers pressed together beneath his chin. "She burned Mom's things," William said, his voice more tired than angry now. "Not one or two, dozens. And she picked them out carefully. That wasn't clearing clutter. That was trying to erase her." Charles finally looked up and, for a long moment, said nothing. Then he exhaled and sat back in his chair. "Camilla didn't do this to hurt you," he said quietly. "You have to understand, she's carried a weight all these years." William blinked, stunned. "You think this was about her pain? Dad, I found her burning Mom's personal letters, not old shoes, not forgotten scarves. A letter to Harry, photos, a ballet slipper." Charles looked disturbed now. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and leaned forward. "It was wrong," he said. I won't defend that, but I won't let this become a public war either. That's not up to you anymore, William said. You weren't there. I was. Charles stood slowly, signaling the conversation was nearing its end. I'll speak to her, he said privately. William gave a quiet nod, but inside, something cracked. His father's response was measured, diplomatic as always. Not once did Charles ask what was lost. Not once did he ask how William felt. That hurt more than the fire itself. As William left the room, a footman overheard a final whisper between father and son. I'm not doing this again, Dad, William said softly. Not like this. Charles remained at the window long after William was gone, his reflection staring back, lined with history, crowned with silence. Outside, the palace gates remained closed, but inside, the monarchy was burning with its own quiet fire, not of flames, but of betrayal, denial, and all the things that could not be undone with protocol. What Diana meant to the palace staff long before the fire, before the confrontation and the cold silence that followed, Diana was not just a princess to the palace staff, she was a presence, a pulse in the halls. She spoke to the butlers by name, asked the junior maids about their families, and once helped a kitchen porter carry a box of dishes when his hand was injured. That sort of memory does not fade. It lingers like her perfume in the stairwells long after she has passed. For the older staff, the news of the burned belongings struck deep, not because of royal protocol, but because of personal pain. These items were not just heirlooms. They were relics of kindness, laughter, and moments that softened the hard edges of palace life. Diana had been a light in rooms that too often felt cold. Margaret, a retired housemaid who had served both the Queen Mother and Diana, was one of the first to call the palace that morning. She had heard whispers from a former colleague and asked if it was true. Go? Were the letters gone? The silence on the other end told her everything. She hung up without another word and sat quietly by her kitchen window. Remembering the day Diana brought her tea after her husband passed away, with a handwritten card and a tiny forget-me-not tucked inside. Inside Clarence's house. The staff were still shaken. Elizabeth, the dresser who had seen the fire up close, asked to be reassigned. She told her supervisor she could no longer serve someone who treated the past like rubbish. No reprimand came, just a quiet nod and a file marked temporary reassignment. In the laundry room, Agnes, who had once ironed off Diana's evening gowns, stared at a damaged blouse salvaged from the fire. The collar was singed, the embroidery ruined, but she pressed it anyway, carefully, as if willing the cloth to remember what it once was. Not all staff spoke aloud about what happened, but their movements changed, less chatter during meal prep, less music in the staff corridor. One footman refused to take Camilla's coat the next evening. Another didn't open the door fast enough. Small shifts, subtle defiance. Nothing bold but unmistakable to anyone watching. Even the portrait of Diana in the hallway outside the Queen's Gallery seemed to gather more visitors than usual. Staff would pause, sometimes just for a breath. Some touched the frame lightly, others whispered short prayers. It became an unspoken ritual, a way of saying, we haven't forgotten. For them, Diana was not a memory to be edited. She was a chapter they had lived through, a chapter they cherished. And now that someone had tried to tear out those pages, they held tighter to what remained in their minds, hearts, and the silence they shared. A silent loyalty that no fire could burn. The hidden agenda. Was this really about power? As the dust settled and the silence grew heavier inside royal walls, a new question took root among those who dared to look past the surface. Was the fire an act of emotional frustration? Or was there something deeper, something calculated, about power, legacy, and control of the narrative? Camilla had always known she could never erase Diana from the public's heart, but perhaps she believed she could reshape how history remembered her. Burning Diana's belongings was not impulsive. That much was clear. The items chosen weren't random. They were emotionally potent. Personal letters, symbolic outfits, sentimental trinkets. All one of a kind. Once gone, they would exist only in memory. Some insiders believed it wasn't about grief or old resentment, but about inheritance. Not financial, but emotional. Camilla was not just a stepmother or a queen consort. To many, she was a controversial figure who had fought for acceptance. As the years went on and she had begun to take more space, not just in the palace, but in royal history books. But as long as Diana's artifacts remained, so did the truth. A truth she could never fully rewrite. Aides in the royal archives quietly confirmed that Camilla had inquired months earlier about a few of Diana's stored belongings, asking which ones were set aside for the children and which were still undocumented. It seemed like idle curiosity at the time. Now it felt like the prelude to something deliberate. Lord Ashcombe, a longtime royal historian and close friend of the late Queen, made a subtle comment during tea with a biographer that week. History is always vulnerable to those who outlive it, especially when the objects are no longer there to defend themselves. In royal circles, history is currency, photos, handwritten notes, heirlooms. They are not just family keepsakes, but anchors of reputation, proof of who loved, who served, who mattered. In this quiet war of remembrance, burning Diana's things felt like more than an emotional purge. It felt like an attempt to shift the weight of legacy. Camilla had risen from scandal to coronation, outlasting years of press torment and family tension. But Diana's ghost lingered in the soft eyes of William and Harry, in every public tribute, in every mention of compassion tied to the monarchy. To truly establish herself, Camilla needed not just to be present, but to be uncontested. Perhaps the fire, silent and unseen by the world until William arrived, was her attempt to reclaim a past she never controlled. But she underestimated the cost. In burning what belonged to Diana, she didn't just challenge a legacy, she awakened a loyalty that even a queen could not extinguish. Afterwards, Diana's room is locked forever. 2 days after the fire, something unexpected happened at Kensington Palace. Early in the morning, before the public gates opened to tourists and camera crews, Prince William arrived alone. No entourage followed. Dressed in a dark coat and carrying a single key, he walked past security with the quiet authority that only grief can give. He was headed to one place, his mother's private room. The space had been untouched for years, not as a shrine, but as a form of respect. It had always been understood that Diana's room would remain as she left it. A few staff were allowed inside for preservation, dusting, temperature checks, but the essence of it, the photos, the perfume bottles, the scattered charity notes, remained as she had known them. William stood at the door for a long moment before unlocking it. The sound of the turning key echoed down the corridor. Inside, the room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. The curtains were drawn, allowing soft light to spill across the writing desk where Diana had penned letters to her sons. On the bed was the same embroidered cushion that had comforted her during nights filled with worry. He didn't touch anything at first. He simply stood in the center, breathing it in, the familiarity, the memory, the warmth that somehow still lingered. But William hadn't come to reminisce. He had come to make a decision. He walked to the desk and opened in the bottom drawer. Inside were small boxes marked by year, 1988, 1991, 1999, each filled with personal keepsakes. He began selecting items one by one, placing them into a locked container he brought with him. Letters, a cassette tape with her voice, a bracelet with William's name etched into the back. The objects weren't meant for display, they were meant for protection. Once finished, he sealed the container, locked it, and handed it to a trusted aide waiting outside the door. "Stored it in the royal vault," he said, "not under her name, under mine." Then, without hesitation, he turned to the head steward of Kensington Palace. "From today forward, no one enters this room without my direct permission. No photographers, No tours, not even family. This room is no longer public. It's sacred. The steward nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. This was not just about preserving history, it was about drawing a line. Later that day, an internal memo was circulated to palace staff. The room had been officially sealed, access revoked, security upgraded. No explanation was offered to the public. Tour guides were instructed to redirect questions. But among those who had once walked those halls with Diana, there was a quiet sigh of relief. William had done what many feared no one would. He had taken back control, not just of a room, but of a story. Behind that locked door, Diana's memory would finally rest, not just remembered, but protected. A son's promise, William's silent tribute. In the days that followed the sealing of Diana's room, William remained largely out of the public eye. He attended scheduled engagements with a composed face, but behind the scenes, something had shifted. His steps were more deliberate, his tone with staff, while still kind, carried a firmer edge. Those closest to him could feel it. He was grieving again. Not in the loud public way he had as a boy, but in the quiet, intentional way a man protects what he loves. One evening, long after the palace lights had dimmed and the children were asleep, William sat alone in his private study. A fire crackled gently beside him, its warmth no comfort to the thoughts that filled the room. On the table before him lay several photographs of Diana, some formal, some candid, all personal. He picked up one of her holding baby George, a photo never released to the press. Her smile, assuring and tender, made his chest tighten. He wasn't angry anymore. The confrontation, the burned belongings, the empty explanations, those were behind him. What remained was resolve, a sense of duty, not as a prince, but as a son. He reached for a leather-bound notebook and began to write. It wasn't for publication or biography, it was a letter, a promise, one only he would read. In it, he wrote what he could never say aloud, that he would raise his children to know her, not just through stories, but through values, that he would guard what was left of her legacy, even if others tried to edit it, that her voice, her kindness, her fierce love would echo in the way he ruled, the way he served, the way he fathered. The letter ended with a simple line, "You were never just history. You are still my home." He folded the letter and placed it inside a silver box, locking it with a small key he wore beneath his shirt. The box would be stored alongside the rescued items from the fire, safe in the royal vault, waiting for the day George, Charlotte, and Louis were old enough to understand. But William's tribute didn't end with letters or sealed rooms. Quietly, he began laying the groundwork for something bigger, a new charitable initiative in Diana's name, focused on mental health and child advocacy, developed behind the scenes. No press release, no fanfare, not yet. But it would come, not to compete with Camilla's public role, but to gently reintroduce Diana's voice into the future of the monarchy. He didn't need a campaign. He had a memory, conviction, and most of all, time. And as he stood and walked to the window, the sky was beginning to lighten. A soft, pink glow crept over the city. For the first time in days, he let himself breathe. The fire had taken fragments, but it could not take the whole. His mother's legacy would not be erased, not under his watch. In the end, it wasn't the fire that left the deepest scar, it was what it tried to silence. But memory is stubborn. Legacy lives beyond flames. William's quiet defiance, his sealing of Diana's room, and his silent tribute marked more than a response to betrayal. It was a son's vow, a guardian's stand, and a future king's declaration that some histories are too sacred to burn. Behind palace walls, loyalty whispered louder than power. In the stillness that followed, it became clear. Diana's presence would never fade. Not in photos, not in children, not in the hearts of those who knew her light.